and we just screened my film, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I went around for 3 years. Most of the people I met were through friends of mine just living in New York City. Living in New York City, I have friends from all over the country and all over the world. And in terms of friends all over the country, when they found out that I was doing this, friends from, say, Iowa would call me and say, you know, I grew up near a military base. Somebody I went to high school with, turns out that they're gay, and her girlfriend happens to be in the military. Do you want to see if I could set up a meeting? And I would ask them to do that. And sometimes it would happen, and sometimes the person was just too nervous and wouldn't agree. But when it did happen, I would go to wherever, interview that one person, because there had been trust from my friend to the partner, and then interview the person and ask if there would be somebody else that they might introduce me to. Usually there was, and I would, start meeting one person to one person to one person. I would leave after 3 or 4 days because, of course, I didn't want the military to find out that I was there. And people were, you all know this. I'm talking to active duty and veterans right now, so you know the danger and the real paranoia that exists. So people were scared I might have been followed. People were scared I might be seen with them. People were scared I might get in a car accident and then the tape might end up in the hands of the police, which we also all know has happened. So when I talk to civilians, they're like, well, why didn't you send it out on the internet? Well, of course, we all know I couldn't say this on the internet. And then a guy named Cale Lehman, World War II veteran, who has since passed away, was with gay, lesbian, bisexual veterans of Greater New York. And he had kept files for probably the past 20 years when I started interviewing, newspaper files from pro-gay, anti-gay, each specific person that had been in the press. And through him, he helped me contact Miriam Ben Shalom. I think I met Jim Darby, who was then the president of American Veterans for Equal Rights, through Cale. And so that was a great resource too. Those were the two main ways that I met people. Did I ever feel in danger? Not that I remember. No. I felt crazy a lot of the time. I would drive for miles. I remember one time driving I was down in DC, and I drove for over 3 hours to a base to meet somebody at this gate, blah, blah, and that person never showed up. Now, I was late because it took me longer to get there. But this happens sometimes, and I just had to chalk it up to, that person probably talked to a friend of the military, and the friend of the military probably said, you're crazy, why are you talking to this guy? You don't even know him. So, I'd be alone out in the middle of I didn't know where, but, I'm kind of used to that too. I did feel emotionally overwhelmed. I felt emotionally overwhelmed talking to Alan Schindler's mother. I had to keep reminding myself that I was actually sitting in the room with her because my spirit just wanted to sort of escape. I have to say I was emotionally overwhelmed reading all the Senate testimony. It was incredibly debilitating to me to read, the Senate testimony there. I think they even wrote where the applause were, to just hear the gay baiting that happened to people like Greta Kammermeyer and others, and the support and the legitimacy that that just homophobic nastiness and homophobic rhetoric was sort of allowed in our government in hearings. So that was awful. And then I would read a little bit of the testimony or watch some of the testimonies I was able to get, and it just got so really demoralizing that I said, what I need to do is just go out and interview more people, especially interviewing the older veterans, the World War II veterans and the Korean War veterans. And of course you saw I interviewed I interviewed a lot of Vietnam War veterans too, and they really inspired me, and they were people that I didn't even know before I started this, you know. And so that was a great thing that happened to me emotionally, was exposing myself to role models that I hadn't known before I started the work. He's a lot of things, you know. He's fairly straightforward, as you said. He's also fairly deceitful, I think. He takes it very seriously, but he also jokes about it. He was very honest, I think, and he always was, that this was a political gambit that they played to save Clinton's presidency, in terms of that's how he saw it. But really felt that privacy trumped everything, and that a straight, I mean, he said in another interview, you know, a straight person has the right to be a prude, or something like that, meaning that, you know, straight people have the right to be prejudiced against gay people. I mean, that was what he felt, you know, and that informed national policy. He did say to me, if there was a draft, the issue would be over with immediately. That if there were a draft, gay people would just be in the military. Yeah, he's seen the play at least twice. He took part in panel discussions after the play. I think he was supportive of what I was trying to do in the play, which was get the stories out, and that eventually maybe the poll numbers would change, because, you know, he was a military sociologist, and he really looked at the statistics. Now, you know, how you read a statistic, you know, for me, you look at a statistic, it can say whatever you want it to say, you know, well, not exactly that, but you can read into it what you want. But I think as he saw the poll numbers changing, I think he would have at some point changed, although I don't think he ever did. And I really enjoyed spending time with him. He's a very charming, fun person who didn't think that gay people should go to hell, but just didn't think that a straight person should have to be naked in front of him, basically. Yeah, there were. Just going back to Moskowitz, you know, I shouldn't be putting words in his mouth. That's how I interpret my interview and time with him. I interviewed almost 200 people, so there were a lot of stories in there. I couldn't tell the same story or similar stories twice, because, you know, I'm creating a piece of entertainment that we're going to sit through. The play was almost 2 hours, 2 acts. The movie's 85 minutes. So, you know, I had to keep the momentum and the ball rolling. I found that minorities, people of color, women, were more wary of letting their stories go out. And my feeling is that often those are the people that worked harder and fought harder to get where they were, and it might be harder for them to gain the same career level if they were to lose everything because of prejudice. In particular, there's an African-American guy who, great interview, great character. He had been in the military in the 60s, been drafted, got kicked out, got fed up and went abroad, just decided to live out of the country for a while. The military tracked him down, told his employer overseas, civilian employer overseas, that he had been kicked out of the military, and that employer overseas fired him. So, you know, we all know these stories, this audience, but, you know, what happened to people just, it's overwhelming. I didn't always have this agreement with people, but I had a verbal agreement with him that I would interview him, I would show him the interview that I wanted to do, and he wasn't allowed to edit it, but he could say yes or no. And he said no, because he thought that he might be, even though I tried to hide his identity, he thought he might be revealed. And I can understand that, because he had a very specific job, it was a very, very specific situation. Miriam is well, she's an incredible woman. She's been fighting for a very long time. She's never given up. I interviewed her at a pretty dark time for this movement. It was in the late 90s. And a lot of the veterans and active duty people felt abandoned by the military, abandoned by the gay movement, abandoned by their families, you know, so it was a dark time. But she, for me, holds an anger that I have that I don't know how to express. So I just let her do that for me, in a way. Inspiring person, and I think it's important for all of us and for young people to know about her. Yeah. You know, witch hunt is, and from the men too, but from a lot of women. The two women that go back and forth, one of them had been caught up in a witch hunt. She was a former Marine, and you know, they bring one person in and they say, we're going to throw you in jail for 50 years, and if you don't give us unless you give us names of other people, and some people would, and some people wouldn't, and then they call the next person and the same thing happens, and you know, that's a witch hunt, and it happened to a lot of women. The way she ended her, she said, was she went down to the gay bar and asked all her male friends to swear that they had had sex with her. You gotta laugh, right? So, you know, it was very scary for her and everything. I don't know if that is how it really ended it, but that's how she liked to tell, you know, the story. But I think it may be true that in terms of percentage, there are more. There's certain, but in percentage, lesbians have more trouble in terms of percentage of represented in the military than gay men do. You know, it's hard to talk about those statistics. I mean, another funny line was, you know, a woman said, well, when she was growing up, she had two choices. She had to become a nun or go into the military. Coming out has different levels of danger for different people in our society, you know, for men and women and you know, people of color, and a lot of World War II veterans, men and women. The only person I ended up using was Frank Kameny. Yeah. You know, it's hard to say why this happened. A lot of it just has to do with, you know, what works on stage. One was retired. She'd been a full bird colonel, retired. The other one had been a Marine, enlisted. And she, at the moment, was working as a civilian for the military. I forget which branch of the military. But she was still very, very paranoid about being outed, not only in her community, but also because she was still a civilian working for the military. Ed Clayton sort of shows that. Again, you tell the story once, and it's hard to tell it again, but he talked about going to boot camp, and you know, what that was like. I mean, you know, there was a kid I interviewed who, when he was in boot camp, and when I interviewed this kid, he was probably in his early 20s, and I think he'd been kicked out for being gay. He might have resigned, re-enlisted, I forget. But he wasn't in the military anymore because he was gay. But when he was in boot camp, his boyfriend was killed in a robbery, and he couldn't talk to anybody. He couldn't talk, because when you're in boot camp, I mean, I haven't been in boot camp, but what he said was, you know, your calls home are very restricted. Your time is very, you know, they have you going 24 hours a day. I don't know really actually how often you're allowed to call home, but I'm sure it's restricted. And then there was nobody. He was going through this grief, and there was nobody in boot camp on the base that he could talk to, which, you know, talk about isolation. I would say she was also probably 70s and 80s. That's Bridget Wilson, and she's actually a pretty well-known figure in the community. A lawyer, and she's been working for a long time to represent kids. Alan's mother brings the audience to such depths that holds its power well. And I think that, I mean, I felt that when I was performing the play, that there were the ghosts of the other people that I interviewed, and then the ghosts of the other people I never interviewed. That they are all sort of around the play also, and they're also these sort of anonymous people. You know, also in talking about Alan's story and Alan's mother, she was more descriptive of what they did to him than I brought into the play. And again, I think it's what you're talking about, that she's representative, or at least she says enough where our imaginations can fill in the rest. And I think that's the same with Represented. We know that other people have gone through the same. Our imagination can take us there.